Hi everyone, I'm Molly, I'm 16 and I'm at High Stores at the moment, and I've been working at Youth Strike for Climate for about 2.5 years now, helping with management and outreach like this. So Greta Thunberg's One Woman Climate Strikes began in around August 2018 when she took a day off school to go and protest outside the Swedish Parliament, and this really quickly accelerated into a global movement once it got media attention and has seen protests in almost every city around the world, so it's been hugely successful. She realised that she needed to respond to the growing climate crisis, knowing that if we go above a limit of 1.5 degrees in global temperature rises, then we will see catastrophe. So there's been very little, up until that point, there was very little action from world leaders, predominantly because they were trying to appease large corporations, particularly in the oil industry, to make sure that they kept profits going and they didn't harm those companies. So it's had huge effects, and Greta Thunberg challenged that. She was 15 years old at the time. It doesn't sound like that long ago, but it was about 3 years ago now, and we've come a really long way. So initially that birthed the Fridays for Future movement, which went on to create Youth Strike for Climate, and that hit the UK in about February that year. So on February the 15th, there was the first ever strike in the UK as part of Youth Strike for Climate. And it hit the media incredibly hard and spread like wildfire, including up to Sheffield. So we had a strike of around 600 students, and that was when we had speakers from the likes of Extinction Rebellion, which was the very beginnings of the Sheffield Climate Umbrella Group, and there was chants like "This is what democracy looks like" and "There is no planet B," and all of that came together to form the foundations of Sheffield Youth Strike. And then the following Saturday, a group of students met up, and they had mostly only met for the first time at the strike. They made placards, they created an Instagram and a WhatsApp group, and that was the official beginnings of Sheffield Youth Strike for Climate, and that is how so many of our sister groups, including in places like Manchester, also began. Before I talk about the other strikes, I want to talk a little bit about why it's so important that we take action. We live in the global north, and the UK is quite a wealthy country, so we probably won't feel the effects of climate change for some time. That might seem lucky, but we also have to realise that there is going to be a lot of suffering, particularly in the global south. We're already seeing the impacts of climate change with adverse weather, flooding and so on, and unfortunately it has proved to create tragedy in many circumstances. So if we scratch the surface, we realise that Britain is actually hugely complicit in the system that has brought about this destruction. We are actually responsible for 5% of all carbon emissions throughout history, which is a massive number considering actually we're quite a small country. And unfortunately, our past of imperialism and colonialism has meant that we have stolen vast sums of wealth from third world countries. That taking away that wealth has then meant that future generations didn't have sufficient funds to tackle issues like climate change. So yes, we're wealthy, but it's completely unjust. And these countries that can't afford to tackle it, but will be the first to be affected, and already are being affected, are in such a position because countries such as our own have stolen so much from them. This means that the government and our country has a duty to help those other countries and tackle climate change globally. The other thing is that if we've learned anything from the last year, it's that global issues such as these cannot be ignored. We can't wait for worst case scenario. We have to act quickly, and we have to act with everyone in mind. And you can play a huge part in that as young people, even if it's not through strikes. Individual actions are so important, but we cannot forget that even better than that is the system change that we've been pushing for so long. I want to skip ahead a bit in terms of our timeline to 2019. That was a massive year for climate strikes. We had monthly protests, so we were really, really busy. We had turnouts of hundreds, even thousands of students, and it really started to make an impact. We even secured meetings with the local council and officials, and with the now MP Olivia Blake, which was incredible. We realised we needed to push even harder though. So during the year, we started building solidarity and building those connections with workers and unions across the city, because they have a role to play in the economy right now. These are the people that are in the jobs that will be affected by climate change, and are the workers who, hopefully as the economy becomes more green, will be having to retrain and look for new opportunities in some cases. So we really needed to make sure that they were on board and we were mutually supporting each other. And we want to make sure that, as always with change, it happens from the ground up and not the top down. So the strikes were massively successful, and as we started building momentum, the unions were amazingly generous, and we went and we spoke to them and they gave us donations, they came to support our rallies, and that all culminated to the infamous 20th of September. That was when we saw 5,000 of you, alongside workers, uni students, march through Sheffield, and it was one of the largest protests the city has seen in the last decade. So a huge, huge achievement. We also stood on that day in solidarity with 7 million people across the globe. It's showing how much this movement has built momentum, and that actually led to massive changes behind the scenes. It allowed us to not only expand our organisation, but begin working and cooperating with other citywide organisations. So for example, it was really instrumental in pushing for the government and the local council to declare a climate emergency in the UK. And then very, very sadly, the next year, of course, COVID struck. And that means that our strikes are not happening at the moment. But we've still been doing a vast amount of work behind the scenes, including working with the Climate Umbrella Group to host summits where we've had workshops educating young people, as well as making sure that we're bringing media attention to the issue and continuing our social media campaigns. We still have a massive fight on our hands. Governments continue to hand out billions of pounds in subsidies to fossil fuel companies. But there is hope. As the COVID pandemic, hopefully, comes to a close, well, touch wood, we have an opportunity to build back better and not only reshape the economy, but reshape society. We know that we can do better, and continuing to push for that is exactly, well, it's what gives us hope and confidence in our future. COP26 is an international climate change conference for global leaders and scientists. It's happening this year in Glasgow, and of course Boris Johnson will be in attendance. Because it's happening in the UK, it is so important we keep on building those protests and we keep on building those movements to try to force them into action. As you guys are watching this, the G7 will have finished. At the time I'm recording it, it's literally happening right now. And climate change is one of the central issues on the table. And by that, I mean they're keeping things pretty much the same and just rephrasing it to make it look like they're taking action. And we know that this is the pattern that the world leaders love to follow. So when COP26 comes around, we need to make sure we are prepared and we know how to deal with it and we know how to push for that real change. We have so many opportunities ahead of us to make this world a better place, but we cannot do it without young people. And if you don't want to come to the strikes, that is fine. You know, there's so many other ways you can get involved with the climate movement, as I'm sure you'll see through this conference. And just by being here today, you're already laying the foundations for making a big, big change.
Hi, my name is Patrick Wakefield. I'm a Year 11 student from High Stores in Sheffield, and I'm going to be talking to you about some of the ideas and demands of Youth Strike for Climate. And I think a good place to start for this is looking at what our official demands were, which really served the bedrock of our movement. The first demand is save the future. This is the idea that the government should declare a climate emergency and implement a Green New Deal, which would radically change the economy and make it carbon neutral in the time we need to achieve climate justice. The second demand is that the government teaches the future. This is the idea of reforming the education system to teach young people about the urgency, severity, and scientific basis of the climate crisis. Our third demand to tell the future was that the government and the media adequately convey the severity of the ecological crisis and the necessity to act now to the general public. Our fourth demand was that we empower the future. Young people must be included in policy making, and no one should be excluded from participation in democracy on the basis of age, citizenship, permanent address, incarceration, or anything else. We want the UK to be a democracy conducted through a representative system where everyone living in the UK over the age of 16 must have the right to vote in elections. We want these elections to be conducted via proportional representation so that every vote is reflected in our government and is worth the same. But the ideas of the movement are not just limited to these demands. The very nature of these protests, with an open mic where any students from as young as year 6 to as old as university could speak their mind, it really created a diverse space for thought, discourse, arguments, and ideas. I think there was an unfortunate tendency for the media, politicians, and even some teachers to paint the students as being naive or just wanting a day of school, but any genuine first hand experience of the strikes would have shown that to be false. It was constantly repeated that we should not have to have been there. It should not be up to young people to be drawing attention to the problem of climate change or trying to make the government deal with it. But because of the lack of change from world leaders that we were forced into action. The science is clear that if we do not drastically curb the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, we will see devastating climate change. This means worse natural disasters, such as hurricanes, famines, and as the hot climate converts more and more farmland into desert, mass displacement will happen as water and food shortages are very likely to lead to more violent conflicts. And this is not just some prophecy about a distant future, this is happening in the here and now. We are seeing the Amazon burning. We have seen fires rip around the world from Australia to California. In 2019, we saw Matlock, which is just over in Derbyshire, flood. We need to act now. And this was the message that we were spreading at the strikes. I think there's a real shame that some cynical people talked about us losing out on an education, such as then Prime Minister Theresa May. Because we need to see education as more than just regurgitating information for exams, but actually about it being about learning about the world, about ideas, about critical thinking. And if we do see education in that light, then it's clear that the experience of these strikes is a far more educational movement for thousands of people, myself included, than any single school day. The strikes gave young people the opportunity to learn about the world and themselves in it, giving speeches in front of hundreds of people, debating ideas, pushing for that change within the world. Really, these are clearly very educational things. The mantra that we are just kids and that we do not know what we are talking about is false. However, sure, somewhere within there's a point that we as students, we don't know everything there is to know about climate change. But once again, whose fault is that? Our second demand is about reforming the education system so that we do know these ideas, that we do know how to tackle the climate crisis, because at the moment we are not being given that education. The strikes also created a space where climate science could be taught, and it enriched the learning of so many students on a much broader basis than is available in the curriculum now. I also think that we need to dispel that only the most righteous people should be allowed to go on climate strikes, that only the most educated or the most knowledgeable about the climate science should have participated, or even the most eco-friendly people. I got it a lot. Oh, you, Patrick, I saw you in a car ride. Oh, Patrick, that's plastic. Oh, you're not doing the most for the climate crisis. But actually, every student has a right to fight for their future, regardless of their lifestyle, regardless of anything else. And it is a future that is rapidly being stripped away from them. We must remember that people don't just first learn everything and then go out and change the world, but it's actually through the process of fighting for that change that they learn about themselves and their role in society. And that's why it's such an important movement, and that's why we've got to keep on pushing for climate justice.